Welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, I've got Jordan in the studio with me. Jordan is an old friend of the show, is our Discord moderator, and it's just a good buddy. And I'm so glad to have you back on to have a chat. Um, Today, we're going to be talking about all things LMG. The LMG world is something that Jordan got into, and I can't remember. Like it was sometime like really last year you started getting into it, right?
Yeah, I actually it might have been just like the end of the year before that. I think I got into it December of 2021. Because that's when I got my RPK 16. That was my first LMG. I got it in on Christmas. So yeah, the very end of 2021 was when I got into it.
Yeah, and we've talked about on the podcast before. I know myself and Pat have talked about it. Where we play, everyone has access to use full auto, right? So if you're a rifleman, doesn't matter what you're using, whether it's an MP5, whether it's an M4, whether it's an AK, whatever. Like if you have full auto on your airsoft replica, you can use it as long as you're using it on the fields where we permit it to be used in terms of just safety and stuff like that. But if you have full auto, you can use it, right? And in that context, Pat and I have often said, like, there's never really been a time when we had an LMG for how applicable it might be. But talking to you and talking to a couple of other people in Discord as well, I've come to appreciate that in the US and in other areas as well, only LMGs, or I guess HMGs too, if you're going that route, are able to use full auto. And if you are a rifleman with rifleman limits, then you can't go full auto. And in that context, the LMG really gives you a different sort of gameplay, a different sort of style. And to what I wanted to talk to you today, and we'll get into it in a little bit, is really how different is that? What does that mean for the average person who's looking to get into the LMG, maybe even become like a support gunner with their team and all this kind of stuff? And some of the misconceptions too that people have about running that type of setup and how to really be effective with it on the field. So I'm excited to talk to you about that today. Um, where I really want to begin is right at the beginning. So, we've talked about before how you haven't been playing Airsoft for a very long time, relatively new. And
That gets shorter and shorter every time we talk about
that's
it, you
right,
know.
it's true.
Yeah. Yep.
But how did you first, I guess, dip your toe into running an LMG? Like, what was the appeal for you initially?
You know, I the first time that I really saw an LMG that I liked was actually I was playing at a field in Massachusetts with one of my teammates, Jeff, and there's a guy there that would always rock like super impressionist Russian kit, and he had a really 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 cool RPK 16,
Mhm.
and that was like the first time I had seen it. I was like, well, that's considered an LMG. People are able to use that, like it's just the size of a normal AK because AKs are pretty long to begin with. Like a regular AK is much longer than a regular M4 that you would have unless you were doing like
Right.
a recon or DMR setup on it. And I looked at it and I went, "Wow, that doesn't look that much bigger than the guns that I have." And it just looked awesome. You know, I was able to play next to him. I was able to hear what he was doing, and whether or not, I mean, he was getting a bunch of kills is besides the question. But more for me, it was like, wow, that gun just looks really cool. And then that kind of kickstarted me into looking further into it. So from there, I mean, I'm always consuming airsoft content. Not as much recently, but back then I was like watching stuff all the time. Like when I would sit down to eat food or something, it would be something airsoft. I'd just be watching it.
Right.
And Airsoft Alphonse, the very prolific LMG YouTuber, is always running an LMG of some sort. Big LMGs, small LMGs. You know, most of the time they're really big and heavy ones. And I just saw what he was doing. You know, the advantage of having full auto over everybody, that's obviously a huge advantage, but it comes with the disadvantage of having typically a bigger, bulkier gun that's heavier.
Mhm.
And it was something that I didn't really see used at my local field often. Most people at my field were running DMRs or they were just running regular M4s or regular AKs, and LMG gunners were kind of few and far between. And especially when they came out, a lot of times the LMGs were just kind of bad. Like they
Right.
didn't have good performance. They were just like stock guns, and the people that were using them were really just using them for like the impression. Like they were dressing the part, and then they had the LMG that went along with it. And that's kind of what wanted, like, it made me want to get into it. Is I played a couple of events. I think I played like one or two Milsim events where LMGs were actually something that I had to compete against,
Hmm.
in like a team based scenario, not just seeing somebody on the field with it, but actively getting shot at by an enemy team with an LMG. It made just a total difference for me. And it really made me think, like, wow, we have to change what we're doing now because of this person. We
Hmm.
can't just play the game that we want to play. We have to accommodate this other play style that's being used against us. And we didn't have one on our team. We didn't have one. So I was looking into LMGs, and obviously Arizona has been super supportive of me playing airsoft and stuff. So I got an RPK 16 for Christmas, and it's just all been downhill from there, man.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
ever since I got that, it was like the gateway drug into less efficient, heavy, bulky guns, and really less efficient, heavy, bulky gear. It's gone like
Yeah.
hand in hand with me getting the LMG. So that's like where I started out, was just seeing other people with it. But really when they used it against us in an event, I was like, wow, this
Yeah,
is
and I mean,
something.
I'd love to expand on that a little. So, like, I guess prior to that, had you ever considered what it would be like to be in that position? So, to be in an engagement where you had someone shooting at you full auto when you couldn't shoot full auto back, and what was that experience like? So, you mentioned like accommodating them, which I guess is probably just dealing with the circumstances, right? But like, what's your thought process when you're in that position?
It is a lot more stressful than I thought it would be in airsoft, especially if they're doing their job. So really what made it for me was we had a team, it was just us, but one of our squads just didn't have an LMG on it. And we came up face to face with an enemy squad in the woods that were already dug in. So they had the advantage on us, but they also had the full auto fire on us because
Hmm.
there was nobody in our squad with an LMG. And once we got under fire, there was almost nothing we could do. We were in cover, and if we wanted to peek that cover, that LMG was on us already. So the angles that we had that were actually good angles, they were no longer good angles. They weren't really relevant to us because if we peeked out, we were going to get shot. That's
Right.
just how it was. So it was really just based around like that thing that you cannot peak against. Jeff has described it in a really good way to me when he got into LMG gunning. He said it's a force multiplier on the field. When you have an LMG gunner that is effectively using their platform and they're effectively positioning themselves, it makes it so that it's almost like you're not fighting one person. You're fighting, that force multiplier in the field makes it feel like you're fighting two or three, depending on where they are. And they can do the job of those people very well. It's
Hmm.
not just only suppressive fire. If they need to get up and move and start like tracking you down, they can do that. It's a very versatile platform. Well, depending on the platform that you're using, depending on the type.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but really, it was more like, wow, I can be a rifleman, and I can also have this suppression element that we don't have, that you really don't see. And quite frankly, most of the time I see it, it's not used that effectively.
Hmm.
When you see an LMG on the field, like, you kind of got to take it with a grain of salt. Like, most of the time it's just an LMG and it's stock and it doesn't do anything. A lot of LMGs have that stigma, like, oh, they don't shoot very far, or people just use like really light BBs in them, so they don't shoot very far to begin with.
Hmm.
So they're not very effective. But when you play against somebody that's like spending money on quality ammo and they've put decent upgrades in it so that it's accurate, and you're challenging people further than they should be challenging you, or that they can challenge you, it's almost unfair. There's almost like an unfair element to it.
So I guess just the cynic in me says like, can't you just suppress using semi-auto? Like, can't I just pull my trigger really fast? Like, what is the key differentiator? I guess when you're using, and I mean, I don't mean to make this like too much of a basic question, but I think it's an important distinction. Like, can't I just hose with on semi? Like, I mean, I hose on semi. We joke about it all the
Yep.
time. I shoot a
Yep.
lot. What is the meaningful difference there?
So the main thing that LMG gunners typically have over like a regular rifleman is their BB capacity, the amount of rounds that they have on them. So,
Hmm.
for example, in my RPK, my drum mags are 2,000 rounds each. And
Wow.
if I
Okay.
have
Yep.
2,000 rounds in one mag, that and it's a just a winding drum mag, so I wind it with a little lever on the front. I can throw down, realistically, in a very heavy firefight, I can maybe put down like 500 rounds, if not more than that, and I still have 1,500 more to go. Whereas if a rifleman is putting down 500 rounds, depending on the kinds of mags that they have, they may be getting close to dry.
Right.
The job of the LMG gunner is, while you can suppress with semi-auto, you just don't have the capacity to do so for such a long time. So it's a lot of people say like well, people will say this about LMGs, but I don't totally agree with it. They'll say accuracy by volume. That's to an extent. Like, if your LMG is accurate as it is, you don't need accuracy by volume. It's just overpowering
It's
when somebody is.
accuracy and volume.
Yes, exactly. It's
Yeah.
both at the same time. It's both, and that's why I talk about not having lightweight BBs in your
Hmm.
LMG. If you're running an LMG, you should realistically be running the heaviest that you can, and I'm always running 3.2s in my LMGs. If I was rich, I would run 4s or 3.6s. Like, I would run super expensive BBs because that just gives you more of an advantage over the rifleman, which is what you're looking for.
Right.
Um, and that's the main thing, is that you have the advantage of having extra capacity. Ideally, if your gun is tuned well, you are either competing with or surpassing most riflemen on the field. So it becomes a thing that you have to deal with, and if you don't deal with it, or you don't have a way to deal with it, you're kind of just in a bad situation.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny that you mentioned like the heavyweight BBs. That's something that we tend to, we've been harping on since the beginning. It's like you don't use 2.5s, don't use 2.8s. Like just keep going, right? Up the
Hmm.
ladder. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's true that that adds another expense factor, which is not really the point of this particular episode, but it's true. I mean, if you're going to shoot 8,000 rounds of BBs, 8,000 BBs in a day or whatever as an LMG gunner, if that ammo is like 0.40 gram or whatever, like it gets expensive. But the other thing too, and I think it is not negligible. Like you got a box mag that has 2,000 rounds in it, right? That is heavy, right? And especially if you're using heavyweight ammo, that's heavy. And then the replica itself is typically not light because the gun is not light, and so what they're replicating, like at the PATS 249, is not a lightweight platform, right? So you
Yep.
have all of this extra stuff, and it's chunkier and it's heavier and all this kind of stuff, and like you were saying earlier, like it's not as effective in terms of a performance standpoint compared to your M4 or whatever. So how have you made that work for yourself? Because I know like in our early conversations, you were all about, all right, let's go, like let's be as effective, efficient as we can be, etc. So how have you made that work for you now? And like, are you done or are you still tweaking your approach?
I don't think there's ever going to be a time that I'm totally done
Hmm.
tweaking stuff. I'm always looking at my gear or looking at what I'm doing as a way, like, what can I do better next time?
Hmm.
I lost this engagement. What can I do better? And it's a learning experience because I came into it with no experience as a support gunner. I was still really new into airsoft at the time, and I got all my experience by playing with semi-auto M4s and AKs. That
Hmm.
was just what I had. And I hadn't used an LMG ever. I only just saw them. And a big change to me was, it became less about being fast at, I mean, obviously you don't reload nearly as much. So that's like something that you take into account. You skip the reload process by um by just having so much ammo. But at the same time, like, you still have to be efficient. So, a big thing that I push for as an LMG gunner is that you need to be just as mobile as the rest of your team.
Hmm.
If you are an LMG gunner and you are not moving, or you are not pushing, you're not doing whatever, you are not being nearly as effective as you could be. And obviously, certain replicas will lead to that being more effective. Certain replicas are easier to be mobile with because people will have a PKM, and that thing's like 20 pounds and it's gigantic. That thing
Hmm.
is not easy to move with, but if you're going to use it, you got to be able to do that. And it's more so of a mindset. Like, it wasn't me just saying, okay, I'm an LMG gunner. Now I'm going to be an LMG gunner and just shoot a lot of BBs. It became more as, like, you are that anchor on your team. Because if you go down, that's a huge element of your team going down. Your attacking force at that point is severely diminished when you go
Yeah.
down, especially if their LMGs stay up. So
Yeah.
it made me be a lot more careful, but also it forced me to be a lot more aggressive, not necessarily in pushing into buildings and stuff, because that's not the LMG strong suit. Um, it's more so that you will have to be aggressive to put yourself into the proper position on the field. Because if
Right.
you are not in the right spot, if you don't move into the right spot, it's almost like you are not like you're not doing anything for your team. If you stay behind everybody, you shouldn't be that far behind your team. You should be pushing up with them. That way they can then move past you and then you can get up with them further. Because that's the
Yeah.
whole thing.
Well, and I think that's something we've talked about before. We talked about it on the Discord not too long ago. Is this idea that like taller, bigger dudes tend to run LMGs or even HMGs, right? Because they're a good fit for their size, for their frame, and so on, which conceptually sort of makes sense. Like, I mean, if you, I guess, if you look in the military, you see that too. Like, you're a taller guy, it's easier for you to haul more kit. Like, I get it. Okay, fair enough. But that we don't necessarily always see that being executed in that way on the field, and in some cases, players, can use that as an excuse to be in the rear with the gear, so to speak, like be slower, be 2 3 lines behind, when really if you're the base of fire element, like you need to be up, to your point, not necessarily up front like online or whatever, it depends on the circumstance, like it's gonna always gonna be different, but at least in a position where you can effectively support your team, hence the name of the role of a support gunner, right?
Well, exactly, and very much like you said, and it was something that you had told newbies coming in. I think it was like in your newbie tips video, how you don't want to get stuck in cover. You never want to get stuck in cover. You never want to not move, because when you do that, you're not doing anything.
Hmm.
I and plenty of times you'll come in and you'll see new people that are in cover, they're getting shot at, and they don't know where to go next. And those are people that you just kind of got to like not really physically grab them, but be like, come on, let's go, and like bring them with you, or else they're not going to be doing anything.
Yeah.
The same thing applies to being a support gunner, because if you are not in position, you are effectively doing nothing. And then if your team dies and you were the last one alive as a support gunner, that's not when you're effective. You're effective when you can use your team to push and get the attention while you are putting down fire on the field. And if you are just alone, they're just going to circle you and you're going to get shot.
Hmm.
You're going to get hit. That's just how it is. So a lot of it is, being able to be aggressive to the point of almost overextending. But if you get into that position, like for example, let's say there's a road that we have to cross, we get up to that road and there's clearly enemy fire going on the other side, we're never going to be able to cross that road. It's never going to happen unless we get up into a position where we can then suppress where they are. So my mindset when I see a situation like that is I'm trying to get up to the side of where they are. I'm trying to get up into a forward position that is almost almost parallel with where the enemy team is, so that I can start suppressing them from the angles that they're trying to shoot at us from. So not directly on where they have good cover, but
Hmm.
now they can't stay behind the rock. They can't stay behind this here because I'm on the other side shooting them from the side. So they can't provide effective fire onto our team anymore, and they have to move. And that allows your team to also move up.
So, and this is an interesting question, like, do you have a sort of like a standard checklist that you follow to help you be as effective as you can be to spot those opportunities? And how did you develop that? I guess because, again, like people have to learn, right? And if you were to give me an LMG and say, hey, use this effectively, like the learning curve is not, it's not forgiving, I would say. Like you need, it's like you were saying, if I go down and I'm the only fully automatic support element, then the team can't, in some ways, can't even afford that. Like it seems like a steep learning curve is where I'm getting at.
Yeah, it's honestly, it wasn't as much as I thought it was. Like for regular skirmishes, it was kind of whatever. I was
Hmm.
doing the same things that I was doing in a regular skirmish, but I had full auto. And I think Jeff was there for the first day I ever used my RPK, and I got like up into a power position. I was up in like a second floor of a tower, and I was just laying down fire on everybody, like every position that was around us, and they really couldn't do anything because I had the range advantage and I had the volume of fire. And like that was like okay, well, this is what I can do. People are peeking me, but as long as I'm throwing down fire and I know it's accurate enough, the chances of them hitting me are much lower than me hitting them.
Right.
And that's kind of where you have to use your advantage, Phil. It's more of like a positioning and aggression thing that you have to use, because if you get stuck and you're not moving, kind of like what you would do as a rifleman, like if you were getting suppressed by a lot of people, imagine that kind of like an LMG gunner suppressing you. One LMG gunner can act like multiple people suppressing you,
Right.
because of the volume of fire. So if you're not in the mindset of like, I need to play for more than just myself, I need to play for like me and one other teammate, like you are doing like the job of two people, you're not going to end up being successful. You have to put yourself into those positions where it's, it might be a risk to get there, but once you get there, it provides something for your team. That's kind of like the whole thing of a support gunner. It's not to get a ton of kills, it's to put yourself in a position that the rest of your team can get a ton of kills. You
Yeah.
allow your teammates to move further, and you don't let people get stuck. And a lot of that comes with both, your positioning, but also communication. Communication was a big thing that changed when I became an LMG gunner, because typically I can see a lot of things. Like depending on my position, I'm very aware of where everybody is on the field,
Yeah.
and or at least in our immediate area. So I have to be loud and I have to be calling out everything. And a lot of the time, if you're not doing that as a support gunner, you're not going to be as effective. I'm yelling and I'm telling them that I'm shooting this position. I'm focusing on this window. I'm watching the tree to the right. The other LMG gunner. I'm doing something like that, and that allows my team to say, "Hey, Jordan is suppressing this guy that was just shooting at me. That means I can now move, or that means I can now do something that I needed to do." And that's just kind of you have to be in the heat of the moment to kind of get it going. It doesn't really just like happen, and I wouldn't even say that there's a playbook other than like make sure you have enough rounds and your gun shoots well enough.
Yeah.
It's a lot of it is just like, hey, I need to be in this position, the right position, and I need to put down accurate fire on their positions so that they can't do the same to us.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about communications, because that's what was going to be my next question. Like, legit, one of the things I always tell beginners, especially when we're hitting the field, is whenever you start shooting at someone, you should be telling people what you're shooting at, right?
Hmm.
Because they don't necessarily know, and if you're shooting at them, then it's probably, if you had more people shooting at that person, that would be better, right? Like in
Yeah,
generally
exactly.
speaking, like if you could have two guns shooting at it, that would be better than one, right? So I can imagine that being a one concrete step that a lot of new LMG gunners, support gunners, can start taking right off the hop, which is communicate. But like, how do you coordinate with your team? Because as a support gunner, you were saying, and I think that's a fair point, like you have a better situational awareness by virtue of your position on the field in terms of suppressing the enemy that you're engaging and all this kind of stuff. How do
Hmm.
you then coordinate with the team to understand what they're going to do or how they're going to use the information that you're relaying onto them? Because it's one thing to say, hey, I'm shooting at this guy. But what they're going to do with that information, you don't necessarily know either. Like, does it come down to just practice with them, or do you have a two-way communication going most of the time?
Yeah. So communication and positioning on the field, and in accordance with your team, is something that I've a huge proponent of. Is if you are going to be an LMG gunner, there should be a reason that you're doing it. And a lot
Yeah.
of times you're not going to be effective if you are not working with similar people. People that you work with all the time will learn your play style and they'll learn how to play around you. And that's something that you can't really do all the time with just like a regular skirmish that you jump into that has a bunch of people that you never play with. So, for example, to answer your question about how does your team know where you're going to go or when they should be doing stuff, I've played with my teammates enough now, or people that are affiliates of my team, all of our friends. I played with them enough now that they know where I want to go, or like times when I'm going to push. And if they don't know, I'm going to damn tell them that I'm
Right.
about to do something. Like I'm going to yell at them and say, guys, I'm moving up, like cover me. Because, as a support gunner, you're not the only one that's doing the shooting. So they can provide support fire for the support gunner so that he can get into position too. But a lot of it comes down to synergy. So it's people that you haven't played with before, random people on the field, rental players and stuff, a lot of times they won't be using you effectively.
Mhm.
And a lot of times when I go out and it's just me playing as an LMG, it's still fun, but it's not nearly as fun as like when I'm with my team or with a group of people that I play with often, and we're able to use the advantage that we have, because we already know like where we want to go. If Will tells me that he's moving somewhere, I know what he's trying to do. and I'll
Yeah.
cover what he needs me to do. If Jeff says that he wants to flank out wide, like I know where he's going. I know his idea of things. Same thing with everybody else on our team. I know if I need to tell somebody, hey, come, let's go do something stupid and push up really far. I know that Jeremy is going to be there to back my ass up and we're just going to run and do something stupid. But sometimes that move is like what you need to do because a lot of people don't expect that. And that's kind of like what it really comes down to is you have to have a team or people that are comfortable enough with going with what you're saying or listening to what you're calling out, because if you're calling out stuff and nobody's listening to you, it is almost like you're playing by yourself. It's, me suppressing for people doesn't work if there is nobody to suppress for.
Yeah.
If people aren't using me effectively, I'm maybe getting some kills, but I'm really just wasting ammo. um and I have just something to say about that real quick. Being an LMG gunner is not all about just shooting. It's not all about how many rounds can you put down range. Quite frankly, I don't even like to shoot that much
I
unless I
don't
need
believe that
to.
for a
Like,
second. I don't believe that for a
listen,
second.
listen. I like to shoot. I like to shoot, but
Yeah, there
it
it
has
is.
to be. You have to think about the logistics of what you're doing,
Yeah.
because if I have limited battery, like I have to change some. I've had to change battery mid firefight before, and on my RPK, that is not the easiest thing to do. If I have to change battery, I am down for at least a minute.
Hmm.
That's like a quick battery change because it's a pain in the ass to change that battery. It's just a very tight under the dust cover space, and it's not a huge battery, only 1200 milliamps. So that doesn't last super long if I'm burning through, every single engagement I get into, I'm shooting 700 BBs. Like that
Yeah.
just, it doesn't, it will go real quick. So a lot of it is like, you have to be able to shoot. You don't want to be shooting too much. You should be using your fire effectively. And you need to think about, where are we going to be after this? Because if you're already low on ammo, or you've been using this battery for like the last firefight or the last two firefights, and you roll up on this situation, you have to think like, am I going to be in a good position when this goes down? Or am I going to be absolutely like out of luck, out in the middle of nowhere where the only cover that I have is the volume of fire that I'm putting back? Because that's another thing. You need to be able to not use cover. You need to be able to use your fire as cover a lot, which I think is something that people don't really think about. I know Dan has mentioned it to me before. He's like, Jordan, I don't get how you just like stand up and just walk and you're not getting shot. It's like, okay, well, what I'm doing is I'm standing up and I'm exposing myself to a position, but I'm immediately suppressing that position.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
get
Absolutely.
up and I'm immediately suppressing the area that I think is the main threat, and then I keep moving. So as I'm suppressing them, they're like, I don't know if they're going to keep shooting at me or not. And as I'm moving myself into a different position, and I'm effectively creating my own cover fire, my own support fire, just by shooting at my threats that are directly in front of me. So it's less about like, how many BBs can I shoot? I just want to sound scary, and more about like, man, every single time I peek up to try to shoot them, I'm getting lit up by this LMG. I can't keep peeking that spot or I'm going to get hit. That's
Yeah.
really what it is. It's the threat of, this is going to hit me. Like I have no chance to compete against it.
Yeah. You've said so much really good stuff, and there's so much to unpack here. But it's really, it's this notion, and I definitely lived it. Like when I was playing one of the games that I played last going off, where I just used the saw, and I decided to use it just for a laugh. Right? I'm like, I'm going to use this, and I'm going to use it essentially the exact same way that I am going to use my rifle, which was definitely a learning opportunity. Let's call it.
Yep.
Um, but like it's a different playstyle, right? And there's, as a result of all the stuff that we've talked about in terms of the weight of the platform that you're using, the lack of flexibility that you may or may not have depending on, whether you're accustomed to it or not. Like in my case, I definitely was not accustomed to it. um, and then the other aspect of how are you utilizing that in the support role, because I think like you said this earlier, like support gunner, that means that you are
Hmm.
supporting something, right? And that has to
Yes.
be, a play, a squad, like whatever, but like you're supporting people. So that means that by virtue just of the name alone, you are not the main character, right? And so you need to understand what exactly it is that you are trying to do in order to support that main thing that's occurring. And in your case, you're talking about like whether it's moving across the street or whatever. Like it's just understanding what you need to be doing on the field. And there's a learning curve. Well, we talked about that before, but there is a learning curve that's associated with that, no doubt. From your early experiences, what were some of the big pitfalls that were the best learning experiences for you?
Man, I'd honestly say like the main things, the main things that I learned from like just being an LMG gunner is wow, you need to be ready to deal with that gun. Whether or not it's the weight of it, whether or not it's the bulk of it, the maintenance, there were so many things that go along with needing to be ready to use that effectively.
Right.
It's not just I can carry this for a skirmish. It's I can carry this while hiking up this hill, while moving quickly to cover. I'm ready for my drum magazine to go down. That's a huge one. Drum magazines are, and yeah, I've heard. I think it was actually eHouse that said this before. Drum magazines are the weakest part like of the LMG. Typically, the LMG can be pretty damn reliable to a point, but the LMG drum mag or box mag is like always the first thing to die. If I had like like if I could count just on like one hand the amount of times that my drum mag has gone down in the middle of a game, I've had two separate situations where I was in the middle of a firefight and a drum mag just died. Not
Wow.
battery died. Like it something happened where it just was not shooting anymore, whether or not it was not feeding or if it was jammed up. And it's happened in some less than reputable situations that I really needed, like really needed it to be up. And that's something that you have to be ready to deal with. So a big thing for me is you need to have the expectation, and the discipline to be maintaining your gear enough. And it's not just playing the game at that point. It's almost like its own mini game. When will my LMG die next?
Right.
Like when will my box mag go down next? Taking out HPA, which definitely increases the reliability of your LMG. You still have the outside factors of a box mag dying. And that is always something I've flat out have been playing the game before and have fallen and shattered one of my RPK drum mags.
I
Like
remember that when you were
yeah,
telling us about it. Yeah, yeah.
exactly. Yeah, I was playing the game and when I was playing the game, it was totally fine. And then all of a sudden, I slipped and it was icy. And next thing you know, RPK goes down. I land. Everything seems fine. Gun's still shooting, but I get up and it's just like sheared. Like the where it goes into the RPK, there's like an area that's like actually shaped like a magazine. That part is just sheared and it's just
Wow.
cracked. And if you tilt it, it just opens. So I'm like, oh great, like that's just dead. That's just dead. I just can't use that now.
Yeah.
And or I mean, I could use it, but I'm at risk of loading my airsoft gun with a ton of BBs, and then it just cracks and dies, like in the middle of a firefight, and I have to deal with that. So it's less of just like, yeah, what do you need to do to be a support gunner? It's more of like, what do I need to do to make sure I can stay up as a support gunner? Because that is
So
like the biggest thing.
yeah, so I mean, I think that this is a really good segue into this next part, which, like you said, you need to be able to troubleshoot these problems. So, and understanding because they do happen, and you've talked about them. What do you do? Like, how are you prepared? How you specifically? How are you prepared now to deal with this stuff as it comes up on the field? God forbid that it does, but we all know it's going to happen. It's like trying to get a printer to work or whatever. Like, you're going to have a problem.
Yeah, no. So what I specifically do is for whatever LMG I'm running, I always try to have a spare drum mag on me.
Okay.
So, and that is why I've had to like switch my kit around to accommodate that. So now I'm not wearing plate carriers anymore. I'm not wearing like low, like light chest rigs anymore. Like I'm wearing stuff that can carry the gear that I need. So like I'll for no exaggeration, I'll just kind of go through like what I'm carrying on me
Yeah.
at any
Go.
given time. So this is just to keep my gun up at any given time. So I have at least two drum magazines. So for my RPK, that's 4,000 rounds between two magazines. I have at least, at the very least, three spare batteries like in my backpack, or one with like close access to me.
Mhm.
Um, on top of the 4,000 rounds that I already have in my gun, between those two magazines, I typically have a full bag of BBs, which is like another 3,000 rounds on me in case I need it. Because, when you're out there, who knows? Who knows how long you could be out there for, which is why I have so many batteries and so many BBs. You
Yeah,
never
yeah,
know
absolutely.
when you're going to need it. And then on top of that, I have to have all of my other gear. So you have to have your dead rags. If you're at Milsims, you got to have your food. I carry a multi-tool around with me in case something breaks, or electrical tape in my backpack just in case. So it's like rifleman stuff, but times it by like five. Instead of having 1,000 rounds on you, you have like 7 or 8,000 rounds on you. And when that's like, those are .32s, that's like an extra 5 or 6 pounds like on your back,
Yeah.
or on your hips. And then not to mention every time you go and lift up your gun, you're lifting up 2,000 rounds. So it's like imagine if you had your M4 and it was heavier just to begin with because it's just heavier for whatever
Yeah.
reason, and then also you taped a bottle of BBs, like a bottle of
Yeah.
32s, just like
That's a great analogy.
onto it. Like that's kind of like what it feels like.
So your arms are
And
like yoked now, is what I'm getting,
oh
right?
yeah, I don't lift anymore, dude. All I do is lift the LMG. That's
Yeah,
all I
ready
got to
up for
do.
days.
No, but no, like seriously, that's like a huge thing. You have to be. It's not just like what can I have on me. Like one speed loader is not enough. Like one 1,500 round speed loader, that's not enough. Like you have to have that spare mag, and you have to have the spare BBs. Like you have to have the spare batteries, everything. Because if you die on the field, man, that's it. Like
Yep.
that's a big thing. You're out on the field, and ask any LMG gunner. There are so many that just die in the middle of the game, and then they're like, "Well, guess I'm glad I brought another LMG," and then they'll go grab like their second support gun, like from the car. Like that is actually a thing. When I bring an LMG, I bring an LMG to support the LMG. If my RPK goes down, I have the stoner. If the
Yeah.
stoner goes down, then I have an M4, which is not ideal. Like it's
Yeah,
not what I want to do.
you're going down the
Yes.
down the tree. Do you carry like a secondary on you as well for that instant? Because I mean, it's all good when you get back to staging or whatever, but like if your gun is down and now it is down, like are you slinging your gun on your back and then grabbing your sidearm or something like that, or are you just walking off?
So I haven't done that yet. I have an M9 that Will had given to me, and honestly, for that, it was like I lost a magazine one time. Like the second time I was using it, it actually fell out while it was in my holster on the field, never to be seen again. Like I came out to staging and I took it out, and the mag was just gone. And I'm like, oh, fantastic! Like I just bought that, like $30 down the
Nice.
drain, for wherever. So honestly, since that time, I've been a bit salty about losing that one mag, and I haven't really been bringing out my pistol. But that is something that I definitely want to add on because I'm luckily enough using guns that have semi-auto to them. So like my stoner has semi-auto, my RPK also has semi-auto. So most of the time, if I don't have higher limits than riflemen, I can use my LMG to clear a building because I can
Mhm.
throw it into semi-auto. But um, if I was using an M249 that was only full auto, I would definitely have to be carrying a sidearm because if I needed to go in somewhere, I wouldn't be able to shoot at all. And
Right.
I have enough people on my team that carry a pistol that it's nice. Like Jeff has handed me his pistol at least 3 times when my gun has gone down in the middle of something, and then I've had to play the rest of the round with the pistol. Um, so I need to be self sufficient in that. Like I definitely need to get a secondary. That's something that I'm lacking right now. It's just not something that I want to go out and spend $200 on to get a pistol and mags right now.
I've heard a lot about submachine gun classes at some games in the States where you guys, if it's shooting less than 1 joule, you can just go full auto. So, I mean, if you want a full auto gun to back up your full auto gun, I guess that's something you could consider doing. Just get an MP5K and put that in your backpack or whatever. But, more seriously, I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, but like, there's definitely like a fitness aspect to carrying all of this kit. How have you experienced that? How has that impacted you over the last year?
Oh, it was definitely, detrimental at the very beginning. I would carry that thing and, honestly, I wish I had more of a padded sling. I'm using a slingster on my RPK right now,
Hmm.
and I use the same slingster on my stoner just because I don't wanna buy another slingster. I have 2 already. I just don't wanna spend more. So I wish I had a slightly more padded sling for the RPK just because it's a bit heavier, but, like that only helps so much. So that extra weight that you're carrying on you, it definitely takes a toll when you're doing anything. Every time you crouch down, every time you go to take a to run, or every time you're hiking up a hill, it's just that extra like 3 or 4 pounds or whatever it is. Add that on top of all your extra gear. It's just like it doesn't easily add up unless you were doing it all the time. So when I went from M4 to RPK, it hurt a lot for a while.
Hmm.
Like for at least the next like 4 skirmishes, it was like, wow, that's really tough. That's really, really tough for me to do. And then I started getting used to it. I started getting used to the amount of weight that it had. And it didn't start hurting less. I think I just started feeling it less. Like I would get more used to how it felt like because it's different. It's
Yeah.
different. If you run every single day with no extra weight on you and then you throw a backpack on yourself, it's gonna not be easy. You need to get your body. It's the same thing for any of your gear. If you're switching up your chest rig or you're switching up your belt, no matter what it is, it can feel different the next time you're using it. So,
Yeah.
now I'm not just running the lightest gear I can. Now I have all of this extra stuff on me. Everything is more difficult now. So it, cardio became much more important. Luckily, I was playing with a bunch of guys who were always kicking my ass, and I really had to push to keep up with them. So that really kept me in the game a lot of time was knowing like, hey man, I can't fall behind for my team. Like I got to keep going. And like it honestly added up. Like I over the course of like from 2021 till now, just by playing airsoft, less so lately, but through that amount of time, it got so much easier just day after day of playing. And I was really just playing airsoft like once on the weekend, like sometimes 4 times a month if I was really really into it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like more recently, like I've really played. Like I played in November. November was the last time that I played, and I was still doing great. And I hadn't played leading up to that point for like at least a month and a half. So it's kind of just like getting used to the idea. Like, man, this is gonna suck, but I just got to keep going because you
Yeah.
can you can push through it. Like obviously, if you're in huge amounts of pain, that's different.
Yeah, totally.
But
That's not what we're
yeah,
talking about. But yeah,
yeah,
and I think we talked about this earlier too. But this, again, this idea of I've got an LMG or an HMG or whatever, so it's okay for me to sandbag my performance. Which, of course,
mm,
that's really not what you want, right? You want to
yep,
say, okay, well, I want to push and push and push, and again, within reason. Obviously, if your legs are falling off, you probably take a second, right? But if you're running with a group of guys who are pushing you to always go a little bit harder, go a little bit harder, obviously that's going to pay off, right? And I think you're seeing the benefits of that too, which conversely you would not have if you had sandbagged at that time. Not that I'm not saying that you're the kind of individual who would do that, but like
mm,
obviously you see the result because you put in the work, right? And I think if you the listener are listening to this podcast and they're thinking about going to the LMG route, like I think there's a bit of mental prep that goes into that if you want to be that effective support gunner, saying, okay, I'm actually going to have to work harder. It's not going to be easier. It's actually going to be harder than easier
mm-hmm.
to be an effective support gunner than what I would call like an individual contributor, right? Like just another
Yeah.
rifleman on the team.
Exactly. And that's what it is. It's not like it may be easier once you get into a firefight. I heard somebody say this. I don't remember who it was, but I think it was like something used in the military. Like an LMG gunner is like the least happy person on patrol, but the happiest person in a firefight because you're carrying around all that heavy shit all the time, right? You're
Yeah.
carrying around that heavy gear, but as soon as you need to use it, that is where you shine. You're not good at recon patrolling. You can be like I use it in recon elements all the time. Having a recon LMG is a totally different level of effectiveness. It's really crazy when you can do that. But it really is something that, like, if you want to keep up with everybody, you're going to have to deal with the fact that, wow, it's really going to suck.
Yeah.
But by getting through that and getting used to that and understanding that, like, well, this sucks, but like it's essential to what we need, that's just what you got to do.
Yeah.
So it was less about me focusing specifically on like I'm going to do more cardio because now I'm carrying heavier stuff. It was more like I'm just going to carry this heavy stuff. Um, I regularly load up my gear with at least similar stuff to what I'm going to be wearing for a milsim. So
Hmm.
I won't load it up with all of the food and all of the water, but
Yeah.
I'll load it up with some more gear that I need to be able to use because you don't want to be in a situation where you are doing great in skirmishes, you're running your gear, you're running the same gear that you're wearing, but you go to a mill sim, now you got a full hydro pack in your backpack. Now you got a full bag of BBs on your hip. Now you have all of your food like on a waist pack or something like that. Like you don't want to not be ready for that. So I think when people say like train how you fight,
Oh.
it really like it's it's kind of like it's kind of like lame, but
Yeah.
also if you are not wearing the same type of stuff, you're not going to be effective with it. You know, you have to get used to
Totally.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I grown at train how you fight because you see guys like, harping on train how you fight, and they go,
Yeah.
and just they're saying that they're using that as an excuse, being like, oh, I'm going to be hard and go and like train in the rain and stuff. But like nobody, you're not being dynamic, you're not moving, you're not doing all the things that you're actually going to be doing. And I mean, I say this being one of those people. Like I
Yeah.
remember all kinds of drills that we used to do, and I'm just like, does this actually ever happen?
No,
No.
no.
Then,
Like I remember,
why am I
yeah,
doing this, right? But
I
I
remember seeing your
definitely
training
hear your
video.
point.
Yeah.
Well, and I hear your point big time
Yeah.
about this idea of like, if I'm going to a game and this is the first time that I'm wearing this kit with this weight, in this configuration, how can I possibly be ready to perform, right? Like
Exactly.
I remember watching a documentary. I think it was a documentary like Bud's Class 234, with about like a Navy SEAL training and all this kind of stuff. And they talk about how the training, people are like, oh, the training is so hard, the training is so hard. It's like when you go to the real world, it gets harder, not easier,
Mhm.
right? And so
Mhm.
similarly to your point, like if you have all this kit and you're like, oh well, when I get to the field, it's going to be easier. No, it's going to be harder, because
No.
not only do
Definitely
you have to
not.
deal with all of this crap, but there's also bozos shooting at you, right?
Yeah,
Like that
exactly.
makes it even worse. So this really reinforces the point for me that if you're going to be going this route, you got to be prepared to try it out and like practice on your own to figure out, like, does this kit work for me? Does it support what I'm doing, etc. And you will make errors that will lead you to learn and grow, right? Like
Mhm.
we've talked about today. Um, but yeah, it seems like such a no brainer, right?
Oh yeah, well that's what you think. It's like, oh, this is going to be so easy. It's not. It's definitely not easy. Everything that you're doing, it's something that you, if you have not done before, it is 10 times harder when you're in the middle
Hmm.
of that firefight. So, you it's funny. I've heard somebody say before you should train battery changes.
Yeah, you
Well,
should.
as an LMG gunner, you absolutely have to. If you
Yeah,
like, you need to be doing that because that happens a lot. Like when I'm running my M4 and I have a 3,000 milliamp battery in that crane stock, that thing really does not go down often. I can play like a whole milsim sometimes on like one battery on my M4. But with
yeah,
my RPK or with my stoner, whatever it is, I'm going through batteries, man. Like I've literally been in a firefight, I've heard my battery drain, and then the next firefight, I have to be ready to change it.
totally.
When it goes down, you have to be ready for it. So for example, um, most recently, I was using my RPK at my last Milsim event, and we were in a heavy firefight, and we were a team of 15 against an element of like 75 and an element of like 40. So
Wow.
we were
Okay.
heavily outnumbered, and we had the disadvantage both in camo because we were wearing all black and gray, and we had the disadvantage in numbers. And my gun went down in the middle of a fight. My gun went down in the middle of a fight. I had to change a battery. I had to yell out to my team, battery is out. I got to change. And I had to put my head down, but my team has to be ready for that to happen. Ideally, I'm changing my batteries way before it needs to be changed, but sometimes you just can't. I'm not, if I'm hiking up a hill, I'm not stopping halfway up that hill to be like, I'm going to change this battery. Like, I need to
Yeah,
get to the top of that hill.
yeah,
And sometimes that hill is gigantic. Um, I know like sometimes it may seem like it's kind of like nothing. Like changing battery is kind of what's the word? like something that doesn't really matter. Like you'll just do it when you have to do it, but it's totally different when you are being relied on for
Yeah.
something. You can't just be like, oh, it will come when it comes. No, it's gonna happen, and you got to be ready for it. So if you don't have the luxury of running like a huge battery, like a Titan, like I don't have that luxury of running a big battery in my RPK,
Yeah,
just due to
that's fair.
battery space. You have to be ready for it. And if you're not ready for it, it's gonna be real bad. It's you got to
We've
be ready for it, just like you're ready for anything else.
Yeah, we've talked about, and I mean, previously with my AEG, I used to have issues where the batteries would just get sucked dry because of a bunch of different issues that were, and I'm not going to get into it, but it was to the point where, like, in any given day, like, I'd be shooting, my typical 8 million rounds or whatever, and so I knew that I was gonna have to change my battery at some point, and so I would go into like the second half of the day or whatever, I'll swap my battery, but sometimes I'd forget, and then I would be shooting, 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 and I would hear the motor start to wind down, and I'm like, okay. And then the MOSFET would start buzzing, and I'm like, all right. And at
Hmm.
that point, I need to be able to dump my gun, swap the battery if it's appropriate. Otherwise, it transitions to secondary. Although, and I remember doing that the first time, and Johnny was on the field, and he's like, "Bro, that took you forever, right?" And it could have been like 3 minutes or something. And I was like,
Hmm.
"No, I need to practice." So then I started practicing. It's like, all right, this is the best way for me to get the stock off and get it back on and stuff, such that I could, because it's a little tight and a bunch of other stuff, such that towards the end, like I went from being able to change it in like 3 minutes to being able to change it in like 30 seconds or something.
Exactly.
And like I distinctly remember doing drills where I practiced shooting my gun with my offhand and no other arm, like simulating like having lost my arm. That will
Yep.
never ever happen. Why would I ever practice that? Right? Meanwhile, I never practiced, trying to speed reload a battery, right?
Yeah.
One of which is way more applicable to what we're doing. And so there's a piece here around when we're looking at our training, we need to train on the actual circumstances that will occur. I mean, and it's fun to do all kinds of fun drills. I'm not saying it's not. And if you love that, then fill your boots, right? Go ahead. We did it. It's fine, whatever. But like if you're training for performance, you need to make sure that you're training on the things that actually matter. And I'm curious, like, we talked about this before, but just briefly, when your gun goes down like that, do you have a mental checklist that you go through to try and troubleshoot that situation? Like, how does that play out in your head?
Yeah, so I mean, really for the LMG, most of the time, like I said, it's like two things. Either the drum mag is jammed up.
Hmm.
In a perfect situation, it's just a battery that needs to be changed. Perfect situation, battery change. I've actually the way that I trained that was when I was playing in skirmishes, I would purposely not change my battery in between rounds. And I would go into the next round knowing that my battery could go down and I would have to be ready to change it. So I that's how I practice doing it. It's by what's the trial by fire? Like it's the best way to learn something, right?
Yeah.
So
Well,
I
yeah.
was like, yeah, in the middle of something like that, like I had to be able to do it. So best case scenario, it's just your battery, and
Hmm.
you just change the battery, it's good to go. Second thing that a lot of times is what happens, it's your mag will just stop feeding. Or you'll be shooting and it's not feeding as well, or something's happening. So one is like, are you out of BBs? Or two, is it jammed? Or is something else totally broken? Because like I said, LMG mags just it's like their specialty is just dying like
Yeah.
out of nowhere. They will just like spontaneously combust on you, and you're just like, okay, I guess this is how it is. And then third thing like that I'm really looking out for when I'm out there is a piston or something stripping while I'm on the field. And if that happens, there's almost nothing I can do.
Yeah.
That RPK does not come down easily. I remember telling you guys about this. It is a pain in my ass to take that thing down completely, and I've gotten good at it now because I've had to do it so many times. That's not something I'm doing out on the field.
Yeah.
I
Totally
am never
legit.
ever doing that.
Yeah.
And that may change depending on what kind of class of weapon you have. Like M249s, I know people bring a spare gearbox on them because it's so easy to just rip out a gearbox and throw another one in. Same
Okay.
thing with like PKM gunners. I have friends that go to Milsom West and they will tell me that they bring a spare gearbox with their gear because there's a good chance that it will go down. They can just rip it out and throw it in. But for more like for guns that you have to like fully disassemble the whole thing, like I'm not taking my RPK apart on the field because if I take it apart, I'm going to lose something.
Yeah.
It's not like an M4 where you pop out a pin, open it up, and it's good to go. Like you can fix the barrel or whatever. It's like the next steps of taking apart your M4, like taking out the battery or taking out the motor, taking off the pistol grip. Now you have to take out pins and all that stuff is like middle of firefight. Not happening,
Not
man.
happening.
Like
Yeah, even in the
that's
safe
not
zone, it's a
happening.
little dicey, right? Like you
Yeah,
lose a little tiny screw, and then what? Right?
that's what it is. I
Yeah.
literally took my M4 apart a couple months ago, and I was just looking at the barrel, and um, the plastic C clip that goes onto it fell off, and I was like, "Oh my god, where did it go?" Because now I can't put my hop up back on because the barrel won't snap in because the C clip is gone. And it falls onto the ground, and it's like all gray and white, and I'm like, "Well, I'm never gonna find this. Like,
Oh my god. Yeah.
I'm never gonna find this." Luckily, somebody found it like right next to me, but like I don't that's at a staging area. Like that is not something that I'm like mid firefight, I'm gonna pull apart my M4.
Yeah.
Like that's
Totally.
not on my list of things to do. But really, like you're luckiest if it's just a battery. You're less lucky, but still lucky if it's a drum mag and you have a spare. But like you are totally out of luck if your piston or your gears break or something like that. Or like your bucking rips, and then you're just like out in the middle of the field with this gun that you can't use anymore.
Yeah.
So
One like last random question I have. I actually I don't think I know the answer to this, and I don't think I've ever asked you either. Like, are you running an optic on your? Okay, you are okay. Because I mean,
yes.
lots of people are like, oh yeah, you could put an ACOG on an M249 and it looks great. I was like, okay, whatever, bro. But like, so what are you using as an optic on your 249,
Yeah,
or
so
not your
on
249, your
yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so on both my RBK and my Stoner, I use I'm trying to remember, it's a Vortex. It's just a
Okay.
Vortex. Yeah, it's a Vortex red dot. Um I bought it because it was like, oh, great warranty. Like if it breaks no matter what, like they're gonna replace it. Um but yeah, I mean all I really do is use red dots. I'm kind of past the point now where I feel like magnification in specific cases is good. Like for instance, Jeff runs a DMR that's at 2.75 joules with like 4/8 in it.
Yeah.
Like he's shooting fishing weights. He can use a an optic and he can really abuse it. But for an LMG, the majority of the time, like you just need that point of reference, which is normally what I use my red dots for. It's more of a it's you want it to be accurate, but sometimes it's just not. So a lot of times it's like, hey, am I pointing my gun in the right area? And then from there, you're tracking your BBs from where
Right.
you're going. So I always, unless I'm using like my AK-74U, I always have a red dot on there. And it kind of feels weird to not have a red dot on there because then you just have no point of reference. And as you know, your BB guns or your airsoft guns, excuse me, they shoot much higher than your iron sights are for.
Yeah.
So if you put your iron sights on something, it's shooting like up to the sky.
Yeah.
And it's you really got to like point your gun almost down in order to hit people. So always using an optic. That's just what I got to do.
Yeah, totally. And as we know, optics are useless for airsoft, right?
No,
Like,
yep. True.
yeah,
Optics are trash. Why would I ever use them?
yeah,
I
total
really, it's just
trash.
for dress up.
Yeah, just throw the BBs at them, right? We talked about that before. So I guess that's a last thought from you. Like, someone is considering getting an LMG, right? They're coming to you for advice. What is it? What is the key piece for them that you want new LMG gunners to really understand the most?
Oh man, I'd say the main point if you want to get into LMG gunning is you need to have one. It needs to be something that you really want to do. Like you if you want to just have the replica itself, you can have an LMG without being an LMG gunner. It's almost like it's more of a mindset than just having the replica itself. Because I can run around with my RPK just doing rifleman things.
Hmm.
But it's a change of playstyle. So you have to understand that as a support gunner, like there's a lot more put on you. Like you need to be ready for that responsibility that comes with it, and not like it's like the end of the world if you go down, but it's much more of a detriment to your team if you go down. So you have to be understanding of that. But also like the main thing I'd say for being an LMG gunner, if you've never ever done it before, um, you need to have the right replica. People will come in first time LMG gunner and they will go right for a super heavy big gun. Like they'll go for a PKM or an M240 Bravo. Like these things are like enormous. These things
Yeah.
are gigantic, and that is not for me, in my opinion, I got into LMG gunning with like a transitionary gun. I had an RPK 16, so it was heavier, but it still felt like a rifle to me. If I had to walk around with what it was essentially a meter stick attached to my shoulder that weighed 20 pounds, I would probably have thought differently before.
Yeah, no
It
kidding.
maybe it would have changed my mind about what it is to be an LMG gunner, but
Yeah,
really, like you have to understand that if you're not going to HPA your gun, you're gonna deal with more reliability stuff. You're gonna have to be understanding that you will have to tech your stuff. It is like a key component of being an LMG gunner is you need to be able to fix your own stuff because you will be breaking it and you will be fixing it often. I've probably taken apart my RPK because it's broken at least 6 times, and I've had that for a year. Like
yeah,
that's a lot of breaking. And to be fair, I shoot a lot. Like I
yeah.
I think Jeff was like, man, that RPK lasted you a long time because you were probably like 80 or 100,000 rounds into that thing before it died. And I'm like, you know what? You're probably right. That's like a lot of shooting that you're doing in a short amount of time. So like you need to understand that being a support gunner is not just the shooting. It's not just being out in the field. It is the constant maintenance. Going into
Yeah.
an event, you need to know that it's ready. If you just used it for 2 events, that third event might be the event it dies.
It
So
definitely will
really,
be. Oh
like,
my god, like
yeah, like
99% chance, am I
that's
right?
just how it is.
Yeah.
That's just how it is. So like, if I'm going into an event, my first thing that I'm going to do is like, oh, man, I just played with it for 2 events. I should probably open this up and take a look at what the gearbox looks like right now. I should take a point to look at, or make it a point to open it up, check the bucking, because when you're shooting 20,000 rounds in a month, or 20,000 rounds in 2 weekends, that bucking is probably wearing down.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, yeah.
It's some people will change a bucking once a year and then they'll switch it out when they're a rifleman. That's probably okay. But if I'm going like 40,000 rounds of my bucking, that thing is probably worn down. So like it's just really, it almost feels like a maintenance mini game. Like when
Yeah.
I'm playing as an LMG. Like for reference, my stoner is dead right now. My RPK is alive, so that's one LMG that's working. I have a broken featherweight M249 over there, and I have a came broken M249, like full weight M249 that is over there. So out of the 4 LMGs that I have, one of them is currently working. So just like keep that in mind. Like
Yeah.
if you have an LMG, you gotta be ready to fix it because that is going to break.
So key phrase for the LMG aspiring LMG gunner is our dollar bill, y'all. Like, so Jordan, thanks so much for joining us, man. It's always like it's so good to talk to you. I'm really curious about the LMG world. Having used it a little bit last year, I really am curious, and I know Pat is waffling between upgrading one either the Scorpion or the LMG, but I know him well enough to know that he's actually going to do
LMG.
both. He's going to do both. No, he's going to do both. Like it's not a question. But when that happens, I really think it's going to be interesting to see how we can maybe apply that, especially given that we're going to be running a couple events this year, hopefully. And we're hoping that will encourage people to try to do that themselves, which will give us the opportunity to try and apply it in the field. But yeah, so thanks for sharing your thoughts. It's always great to catch up with you. And guys, thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for tuning in. That's all we've got for you. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you next week.